We've had just 1 year of the college football playoff at 12 teams, and it seems like it's already expanding. Now, this won't impact this upcoming 2025 season. There's an agreement locked in place for 24 and 25 that all the major conferences would have to agree on unanimously. So that's not in the works. But the SEC and Big Ten want change. And so here's how it's set up. Let me pull up a chart, but before I do, let me shout out this channel's sponsor, Ready Vets. If you live in the upstate of South Carolina and you need to take your dog or cat to see a doctor and you need to do it immediately, that's the place to call. That's the place to go. They're in the Taylor's area, and they're available when you can't get into your regular family vet. So let me pull this up. All right. So in the 12-team playoff there, you see the 4 teams with a white background there on the left column. They had byes. Boise State and Arizona State won their conference, even though they were not ranked 3 and 4. Boise State was 9. Arizona State was 12. So they would have made the playoff if it was just 12 highest rated teams or ranked teams, but they would not have got a bye. In fact, they would have been playing road games. And so that's what you see reflected when you look at the 14-team playoff. So if you shift over one column, you see that now Boise State is the 9 seed. They were ranked 9th. And you see Arizona State is the 12th seed. So they're playing road games. So Boise State would have been at Indiana, and Arizona State would have been at Notre Dame. So obviously much tougher for them not playing that first round game before you even get into the round of 8. So that's where that advantages a team like Texas, who gets an easier matchup. They would play Iowa State. Iowa State would be a new team in the playoff by virtue of being the second best team in the Big 12. Now, the Big 12 probably has some discretion of how they do that, just like they have discretion over their tiebreakers for the championship game. So maybe that could be BYU. It could be Colorado. They could have whatever rules that conference wants. But the Big 12 would be guaranteed a second team. And if you see the notation in italics to the right of the teams, Oregon being Big 10 1, Penn State, Big 10 2, Ohio State, Big 10 3, and Indiana, Big 10 4. Those slots are guaranteed. They're essentially auto bids like we used to have in the old BCS, but now they're auto bids into the playoff. SEC also gets 4, and you see Georgia, Texas, each getting 1, Tennessee being SEC 3. And this is where it gets interesting. According to the college football playoff rankings, Alabama being SEC 4. So in this model, Ole Miss and South Carolina still miss the playoff. So the new teams making the playoff there are Iowa State getting in, and then Alabama also getting in. So those are the new teams. Alabama getting in as 11 seed, but they would be a new team getting in. So that's how that changes. In that scenario, it's actually the SEC getting one more team and the Big 12 getting a second team. It's not just the SEC and the Big 10 gobbling up all the spots. So I don't necessarily hate it. I hate that we're even in this spot. The fact that they expanded beyond 6 is crazy. I liked it at 4. If we jump all the way to the far right, that's what a 4-team playoff could have looked like. You have the 4 teams that clearly earned it, and perhaps those spots are a little bit juggled because they probably don't want Oregon Penn State rematch and Georgia Texas rematch in consecutive weeks. Maybe that gets a little juggled, but nonetheless, there's the teams that really earned it. So I would actually like that best. But anyway, this is a description of what a 14-team playoff looks like. Note there's one sort of wild card / Notre Dame. It's going to advantage Notre Dame, but years where they're not good enough, it goes to just whoever's the most deserving in that case. So one sort of kind of a wild card, but also seems like the way they're talking about it, they're going to give it to Notre Dame if it's at all viable. Now, the 16-team playoff is interesting. You lose all the byes altogether, which I think is fine. Not sure we necessarily need byes. And you admit 2 more schools. So in this case, now you have 2 more wild cards. And if we just stick to the rankings as they were going into the college football playoff, those spots, we had just given one to Alabama. They were the first team out. The next team out would be Miami, and the team after that would be Ole Miss. Clemson was ranked 16. South Carolina was ranked 15, but South Carolina would be SEC number 5. The SEC gets 4 slots, and they're not quite good enough to get a wild card because they're ranked behind Miami and Ole Miss. So they miss out. Clemson still earns the second slot that is a guaranteed slot from the ACC. So in this case, Clemson would be going to Athens to play at Georgia. Not a very advantageous matchup, but I don't know that I dislike this any more than the 12 or the 14. I kind of like getting rid of byes. I always like more games out of these NFL stadiums onto college campuses. To me, that's always a bonus. And anytime you can do that in college football. I love the next season LSU is coming to Clemson and they're not playing this thing in Atlanta and New Orleans, right? It's going to be in Clemson and Baton Rouge. So I don't know that I have a big problem with either of these formats. I actually think the pre-prescribing these the slots for each conference, it's asking for trouble in some sense, especially in a 14-team playoff where you only have one wild card that Notre Dame's going to steal more years than not, or a lot of times earn. I shouldn't say steal. They're usually going to be deserving, and when they're not, they might still get it. So in a sense, I like the 16-team more because you're pulling in teams that, in this example, it's not there's no one crazy left out. But what if the ACC had 3 great teams? What if Miami and Clemson had won one more game each, and they both really deserved it, right? So that's how this will break out. We'll have the same 12-team playoff this coming year, and then it sounds like it's going to go to 14 with 16 being a possibility. Those are being debated. Either way, as an ACC fan or a Clemson fan, I don't think you should be overly worried about it. I don't think it hurts Clemson, aside from the fact that you lose the opportunity to get a bye. Clemson has an advantage in getting those byes. But I don't know. I guess that's why I like the 16 so much more than the 14. If nobody has a bye, fair is fair. You're getting in based on your ranking. And I would love to see playoff games at home in Clemson. Don't so much love it in December. Don't so much love it in, like mid-December, basically, where it's going to be really cold. But I think that is a pretty fair format. Now, the problem with all of these formats or the 12, 14, and 16 is this drags on deep into January before you actually get a championship game. You start running into NFL playoffs. You're deep into college basketball season, and it kind of loses its luster. It drags on way too long. The other bowls are completely meaningless. So you essentially have all these exhibitions as you're waiting for each round to unfold. And I think it's kind of lost some of its luster, quite frankly, not just because some of these games weren't the most competitive last year, but this playoff schedule drags on too long. It feels like the NBA playoffs or something. And so here's what I think they could do to fix it. So first of all, you can just scoot the schedule back. We've already started having all these games on week 0, the weekend before Labor Day weekend. Just start the season there. That's fine, right? There's really no downside to it at this point. I mean, I know there's some schools that might not be in session, which is kind of a bummer, but you got to do it. You got to back this thing up. And so here's how that would look. You could still keep your big matchups on Labor Day weekend. Labor Day weekend could be the really exciting weekend that it pretty much is now, where you have your college football Chick-fil-A kickoffs. You have the Mayo kickoff thing in Charlotte and all of those, right? I personally like them the way Clemson's doing it on campus, LSU coming. So that would be a week 1 game. We would now call week 2, but that would be the same time slot on Labor Day weekend. You would take those games against teams like Troy or Furman. Those are the games that you could play on week 0, right? Get those out of the way, essentially get a warm-up game. I think every coach at least would probably like that anyway. And then you dive right into conference play right after that. So that really opens up the schedule to let's get going, right? But then that's not the only issue. You got to take another week off. You want to wrap this up, early January, not mid-January. So you got to do one more thing, and that's replace conference championship weekend. Especially now, if you're going to go to 14, and in the ACC's example, the loser of the ACC championship is guaranteed a spot. And if they're not, then you don't want to play in that because you'd rather be the 3 and be guaranteed a spot. So you can't really have a conference championship game and then have 2 teams from the ACC make it. Why did you play that conference championship game? They've already gotten their prize. They're 1 and 2. So you got to do something with it. And here's what I think you do. So this year, Clemson will play Furman, South Carolina, and then if they make it, it's the conference championship right after that. Here's what you do. You move to 9 conference games. Clemson's always playing a team like Furman. Sometimes they'll get Wake Forest right before South Carolina, and South Carolina is always scheduling like a Wofford or someone easy. So it's already a non-conference slot. You scoot that Clemson, South Carolina game, scoot the Palmetto Bowl up 1 week, right? I don't think that's going to destroy tradition or anything like that. It used to be on Big Thursday, used to be earlier anyway. So it's actually getting more traditional in that sense. So you scoot the Clemson, South Carolina game up, and then you have a 9th ACC game. The Big Ten, really, a lot of these conferences should consider it. Now, here's what you do. Right, I have Miami at Clemson. Why Miami at Clemson? Why isn't SMU in the championship? It's because it's not really a championship. SMU has already earned their slot in the college football playoff. Let them get an easier game, different game. Here's how it could work out. So it's a dynamic week. This ACC is only going to decide a week or 2 in advance who you're playing. So in the case of SMU, they've earned their slot. You want to make it as easy as possible for them. They have earned one of the worst teams in the conference. They've already played Florida State, who is the 17th ranked team in the conference. They beat them. They already played Stanford, 16th team in the conference. They beat them. They didn't play Wake Forest, and you can't just keep going up forever. But, the ACC will want to have some discretion to avoid repeats where they can. So Wake Forest would go to SMU, what in theory should be an easy win for SMU, and they're in the playoff. Now, Clemson and Miami, they have a play-in game. So this is essentially a playoff game for that slot, right? That 2-3, the second ACC guaranteed slot. Miami and Clemson could face off for it. Now, if SMU, Miami, and Clemson were all undefeated and all locks for the playoff, especially in the 16-team model where there's 3 wild cards, perhaps you do it differently that year. But that's kind of the discretion you're hoping the ACC can handle. And then here's where it gets interesting. The next slot, let's say Syracuse, who was ranked 21st last year at this time, let's say they have a real shot at making the playoff as a wild card. At 21, they probably don't. But let's just say they were 18 or something like that. Maybe you want to give them a tough matchup so they could earn their way in. So you give them the next best team, Duke, at 5. Or maybe you give them a team a little bit better than like a Florida State, right? So you could do that. Or you can give them like a Florida State. A team like Louisville, clearly out of the playoff, but they've earned a softer opponent. They haven't played Florida State. They get a home game against Florida State, right? So you could have sort of that discretion to figure this out and do it right. And so I think that's where this could be headed. I think that's what the ACC needs to do. I think it would be absolutely a disaster to have a ACC championship game that means nothing, where you risk injuries and both teams just don't want to be there because they just want to get to the playoff. A coach like Sweeney is never going to bench the starters in the championship game, but the championship game would be pretty pointless. And I don't know why you'd go sit in the cold at night in Charlotte to watch a game that doesn't really matter. So I think that's where this could be headed. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I think the worst thing was probably moving to this 12-team playoff. But having the auto bids, not giving so much power to the committee to figure it out, and they're really just figuring out seeding at this point, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Always appreciate people chiming in. Don't forget to like the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. It helps a lot. And don't forget to show some love to Ready Vets, our channel sponsor. Appreciate them and appreciate you for watching. Thanks. And as always, go Tigers.